Hello, everyone. I've been lurking on forums like this for a while, thinking I'd never have a story of my own worth sharing. But life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you. And lately, I've been carrying this weight around, needing to get it off my chest. So, here goes. Let me start by saying, I'm not the type of guy who jumps to conclusions or assumes the worst in people. Especially not my wife. Her name is Natalie, and we've been together for 6 years. Married for 4. For the longest time, I thought we were solid. Sure, we'd had our share of ups and downs, like any couple, but nothing ever seemed like a deal breaker. For most of our relationship, we were that couple, the ones everyone teased for being so in sync. We'd laugh at the dumbest inside jokes, spend way too long debating which movie to watch, and slip into this rhythm that just worked. Natalie loved planning these over-the-top date nights, dinners at trendy restaurants, tickets to shows, spontaneous weekend getaways. And I'd surprise her with her favorite takeout after a long day, or leave little notes around the house when she was stressed. It felt effortless, like we'd cracked some secret code to love that other people were still trying to figure out. That's why what happened next hit me like a freight train. About 6 months ago, I started noticing small things shifting between us. And at first, they were so subtle, I nearly convinced myself I was imagining it. Little things, like the way Natalie suddenly started carrying her phone everywhere. She'd take it with her even if she was just going into the kitchen or folding laundry. Before that, she'd leave her phone on the coffee table for hours, never caring who saw it. One evening, trying to keep it light, I joked, "What are you running? Some kind of secret spy network now?" She'd laughed and brushed it off, saying work had been emailing her non-stop lately. Okay, fine. I didn't think much of it. But a few days later, she put a password on her phone. That one surprised me, because she'd never used one before. When I asked why, she gave some vague explanation about security and hackers. I let it go because I didn't want to come off as paranoid, but it stuck with me. It felt off. Then there were the phone calls. She'd started taking them outside the room, something she'd never done before. It wasn't subtle either. Her phone would ring, and she'd jump up saying, "I'll just grab this real quick," and vanish into the bedroom or out onto the porch. If I asked who it was, she'd just say, "Oh, a friend from work." Another new habit was how she'd lay her phone face down on the table. I hadn't even known that was a thing until one day I reached over to hand her something, and she practically snatched her phone out of the way like it was radioactive. It was one of those blink and you'll miss it moments, but it stuck in my mind. And it wasn't just the phone stuff. There was a growing distance between us in everyday conversations. Topics that used to flow naturally now felt awkward and strained. If I brought up future plans, like where we should go for our anniversary, or whether we should start saving for a new car, she'd just nod and say, "Yeah, we'll see," before changing the subject. At first, I tried to chalk it up to stress. Maybe she was going through something she didn't want to talk about yet. But in my gut, I felt the shape of something bigger looming, even though I didn't have proof. I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions. But little did I know, my life was about to be turned completely upside down. Things truly started spiraling for me one random Wednesday evening. Natalie told me she was grabbing coffee with a friend after work. That wasn't unusual. Natalie was the type who loved meeting people for coffee to vent about work drama or catch up on life. That particular evening, I happened to be running errands in the same area, so I figured, why not surprise her? Maybe I'd pop in, say hi, buy her a drink. I thought it'd be a sweet gesture. But when I pulled up near the cafe, my heart sank. She wasn't inside with a friend at all. Instead, she was outside, pacing back and forth on the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear. I stayed in my car because something about her posture and her voice felt tense. I didn't intend to eavesdrop, but the windows were cracked and her voice carried. I heard snippets like, "It's almost ready," and "starting fresh soon." My stomach twisted into knots. None of that sounded like she was complaining about a coworker or chatting about casual stuff. It sounded like she was orchestrating a plan. Something big. When she finally came home that night, I tried to act normal. I asked her casually, "How was coffee?" She launched into this elaborate story about how her friend was griping about her boyfriend, and how the conversation had been so dramatic that she needed to decompress afterward. I just stared at her for a second, trying to decide if I should press her on it, but I didn't. Instead, I mumbled something like, "Oh, wow, sounds intense," and dropped it. But later that same week, out of nowhere, Natalie brought up a topic we'd never really discussed before: our finances. We were in the living room. She was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone, when she suddenly said, "Hey, I've been thinking, maybe we should get all our account information, passwords, and documents in one place, just in case." It caught me completely off guard. "Just in case of what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. She shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "I don't know. Emergencies, I guess. What if something happens to one of us? Or what if we have to make a big financial decision quickly?" On the surface, it sounded logical, but something about how she said it felt rehearsed, almost scripted, like she'd been waiting for the right moment to bring it up. I nodded and said something like, "Yeah, I guess that makes sense." But inside, alarm bells were screaming. Why now? We'd never been the type of couple to micromanage each other's money. We each handled our own accounts and contributed equally to joint expenses. It had always worked fine. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every weird moment from the past few weeks. The secretive phone calls, the password on her phone, the conversation I'd overheard outside the cafe, and now this sudden push to consolidate all our financial info. It was piling up into a picture I didn't want to see, but still, I did nothing. I told myself I was overthinking. A few days later, the subject came up again. We were in the kitchen. I was making myself a sandwich, and Natalie was scrolling through her phone as usual. Without looking up, she said, "Have you thought any more about getting all the bank info organized?" I put the knife down and turned toward her. "Okay, what's going on, Nat? You've been bringing up money a lot lately. Is there something you're not telling me?" She finally looked up from her phone, her expression startled, as if she hadn't expected me to challenge her. "No, nothing's wrong," she said quickly, forcing a little laugh. "I just think it's important, that's all. For emergencies." "Emergencies like what?" I pressed. She shrugged again, her face utterly unreadable. "I don't know, just life stuff. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. Everything about how she was acting screamed that it was a big deal. I dropped the subject for the moment, but my mind was spinning. It didn't feel like a casual suggestion anymore. It felt like she was setting something up behind my back, but for what, I had no idea. The next day, while Natalie was at work, curiosity got the best of me. I logged into our joint bank account, something I rarely did because we'd always split bills pretty evenly and trusted each other. That's when I noticed several small transfers, not huge sums, but a series of little withdrawals over the past month that didn't fit any of our usual spending patterns. They weren't for groceries, utilities, or anything else I could recognize. A chill went through me. Was she funneling money somewhere, or preparing for something I didn't know about? I thought about confronting her right away, but a voice inside me said, "Don't. Not yet." If I was wrong, I'd look paranoid and possibly damage whatever trust we still had left. But if I was right, I had to protect myself before things went any further. The stress was gnawing at me, so I called an old college buddy, Ryan, who's a lawyer. I tried to explain the situation without sounding like a conspiracy nut. After listening patiently, Ryan said, "I'm not saying something definitely shady is going on, but you're not crazy to protect yourself. If you're worried about your assets, now's the time to get your ducks in a row. Better safe than sorry." It was the first time I realized how serious this might be. Up until then, I'd wanted so badly to believe Natalie would never hurt me. But a new thought kept echoing in my head. What if the person I trusted most was planning to betray me? And with that, my entire world began shifting under my feet. After talking to Ryan, I hung up the phone and just sat there, staring at the wall for what felt like an hour. My mind kept flipping back and forth like a broken switch. Part of me thought I was completely overreacting, that I'd look like some paranoid lunatic if I took drastic action. But another part of me kept replaying Natalie's weird conversations, the secret phone calls, and the sudden interest in our finances. It didn't feel like normal adulting. It felt like a setup. That evening, Natalie was working late. I sat alone in the living room, laptop open, heart pounding so hard it was making my ears ring. I started going through every single account we had, joint checking, saving, investment portfolios, the house deed, anything with my name on it. Each document felt like a punch to the gut. For years, I'd trusted Natalie completely. The thought that I had to protect myself from her made me feel physically ill. But Ryan's words were echoing in my head. Better safe than sorry. I made a list of every asset I could move and researched how to do it without setting off alarms. Ryan had explained that the key was timing and legality. If I transferred assets before any legal proceedings, it was far harder for anyone to claim I'd done it fraudulently. I worked into the early morning, gathering paperwork, scanning documents, and creating a plan. It felt like I was plotting an escape from my own marriage. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking of Natalie's smile, our wedding day, the times we'd stayed up laughing over dumb TV shows. How the hell had we ended up here? But the next morning, I knew what I had to do. I called my mom, Diane. She's always been my rock, calm, level-headed, practical. I didn't tell her everything, just that I needed a big favor. Mom, I need you to hold on to some things for me, just in case. She was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but worried. Alex, are you okay? I swallowed hard. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just a precaution. Nothing to worry about. Of course, that was a lie. But I couldn't tell her the truth. Not yet. She didn't push me, just said, "Whatever you need, sweetheart." That night, while Natalie was out, I took the biggest step I'd ever taken in my life. I started transferring the bulk of my assets. I moved most of our cash savings, my personal investments, and, most importantly, the house title into a trust in my mother's name. Everything was documented, notarized, and done by the book. I left just enough money in our joint account to cover bills so Natalie wouldn't notice anything missing. The rest was locked down tight where she couldn't touch it. It felt like I was ripping out pieces of my own heart. When Natalie got home that night, she was cheerful, almost glowing. She gave me a kiss on the cheek and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I smiled and said, sure, but inside, I was shaking. For the next 3 days, I played it cool. I went about my normal routine, trying not to tip her off that anything was different. Oddly, Natalie seemed happier than she had in months. She'd chat about random stuff, new recipes she wanted to try, ideas for redecorating the living room, even little jokes we used to share. At first, it almost fooled me into thinking I'd misread the entire situation. But one thing stood out like a sore thumb. She never brought up the finances again. Not a single word about consolidating accounts, passwords, or emergency planning. It was as if she'd completely forgotten she'd ever mentioned it. At first, I thought maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe the whole thing really was stress from her job. Maybe I'd imagined the secretive phone calls and the tension. But the more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that she was avoiding the subject on purpose. Several times, I caught her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking, like she was trying to read my mind or figure out if I knew something. Each time I noticed, she'd quickly look away and pretend to be engrossed in her phone or the TV. It was subtle, but it was there. It felt like she was waiting for me to bring it up again, almost as if she didn't want to be the one to push the topic anymore. And I wasn't about to give her that opening. I knew something big was coming. I just didn't know when. One night, after Natalie went to bed, I sat in my office and went through every piece of paperwork again. I double-checked that the trust was airtight, that my mother's name was on everything legally, and that all the transfer dates were well documented before any possible divorce filing. I even called my mom to confirm she had all the originals locked in her safe. It felt like preparing for a war, and in a way, it was. 2 weeks passed. Life almost seemed normal again. Natalie was affectionate, chatty, even playful sometimes. It was enough to make me question my own sanity. Until one Friday night. Natalie sat me down on the couch, turned off the TV, and said in a quiet voice, "Alex, we need to talk." And in that moment, I knew. I knew exactly what was coming before she even opened her mouth. Everything I'd been preparing for was about to become terrifyingly real. I remember the way Natalie looked at me that Friday night as she sat me down on the couch. Her face was perfectly composed, almost disturbingly calm. "Alex," she said softly, folding her hands in her lap, "I think we should get a divorce." For a second, it was like my ears stopped working. I could see her mouth moving, but the words felt distant, as if they were echoing down a tunnel. She didn't say it angrily or emotionally. It was as if she were telling me we were out of milk. No tears, no raised voice. Just cold. I stared at her, trying to process what was happening. Meanwhile, she launched into this practiced speech about how she felt like she'd lost herself in our marriage, how she needed space, how she wanted to figure out who she was again. "Alex," she said, "I've made a lot of sacrifices for you over the years, and I don't think you really appreciate that. I deserve more." That last line hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just that she wanted out. It was the way she framed it, as though everything was my fault, and she was somehow entitled to be compensated for her so-called sacrifices. I kept quiet and let her talk, but my mind was racing. Why now? Then she dropped another bomb. "A friend of mine has been helping me see things more clearly," she said, looking anywhere but at me. "A friend?" My pulse quickened. I stayed silent, letting her keep talking. But in my head, alarms were blaring. Who the hell was this friend? The way she said it wasn't casual. It was like someone had been coaching her, planting ideas in her head, telling her that leaving me wasn't just a choice, but a strategic move. The longer she spoke, the clearer it became that this had been building for a while. She kept saying things like, "I deserve more," and "I've been unhappy for so long." Yet she couldn't give me any real examples. No specific fights, no major betrayals, nothing concrete, just vague complaints about feeling stuck. Meanwhile, in my head, I kept ticking off all the ways I'd tried to support her over the years. When she wanted to move closer to her job, even though it meant doubling my commute, I agreed. When she decided to quit her stable job and switch careers, twice, I stood by her and handled the financial strain so she could chase her dreams. When she wanted to go on an expensive yoga retreat last year, I gave up a vacation I'd been saving for so she could go instead. I remembered birthdays, inside jokes, her favorite flowers. I listened to her vent about her job, her friends, her family. No, I wasn't perfect, but I'd always tried. And to hear her spin it like I was some selfish monster who'd stolen years of her life, it was crushing. But the bigger question was still, why now? It didn't feel spontaneous. It felt like a move in a carefully scripted plan. So I decided not to react. Instead, I kept my voice neutral and said, "If that's how you feel, I guess we should figure out next steps." She looked startled, almost like she'd expected me to beg her to stay or argue with her. But I wasn't about to give her that satisfaction. After that conversation, she moved out and got her own apartment. It was quiet, weirdly quiet. The following Monday, I was served with official divorce papers, and that's when I realized the magnitude of what I was dealing with. Her paperwork didn't just say she wanted a divorce. It read like a shopping list. She wanted half of the house, half of all my personal savings and investments, my car spousal support, even though she had a high-paying job of her own. It was outrageous. At first, I thought maybe she was just being spiteful. But the language in the documents was so precise, so aggressive, that it felt like someone else had coached her on exactly how to come after me financially. My stomach twisted as I scanned through the demands. This wasn't just a breakup. This was an ambush. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation at the cafe, Natalie pacing outside, saying, "It's almost ready," and starting fresh soon. I thought of the secret bank withdrawals, her sudden obsession with consolidating our finances. It all started falling into place. She hadn't just woken up one day and decided to leave me. She'd been planning this, and whoever this friend was had likely been helping her set up the perfect exit strategy to take as much from me as she could. But she didn't know that I'd already moved everything out of her reach. The only thing left now was to wait for the showdown. Because I knew the next step was coming, and I wasn't going to let her take me down without a fight. Once the shock of being served those papers wore off, my brain switched into detective mode. I couldn't shake Natalie's words about a friend helping her see things clearly. The way she'd said it wasn't casual. It sounded like someone was actively coaching her. Someone who'd helped craft the financial demands in those divorce papers. I knew I couldn't just walk up to her and ask who it was. She'd either lie or clam up completely. So, I decided to dig on my own. I started with her social media. Natalie had never blocked me from her profiles, and though she wasn't a big poster, I figured there might be clues. I scrolled through every photo, every comment, every like. At first, it was the usual stuff. Pics from brunch with her friends, shots of her yoga classes, inspirational quotes. Then I started noticing a name that kept popping up. Jake. He wasn't anyone I recognized, but he'd liked nearly every photo she'd posted in the past 6 months. Sometimes he'd leave comments like, "You've got this," or "Proud of you." It wasn't overtly romantic, but it felt close. I clicked over to Jake's profile. It was public, and at first glance, he looked like a regular 30-something guy. Worked in marketing, posted gym selfies, quotes about grinding for success. But as I scrolled further back through his photos, one particular post made my blood run cold. It was a picture of the exact cafe where I'd seen Natalie pacing outside on her phone a few weeks earlier. The timestamp was from the same day I'd been parked across the street, watching her. Coincidence? Maybe. But my gut screamed otherwise. I kept digging. A few posts later, I found a selfie Jake had taken in what looked suspiciously like Natalie's new apartment. The same unique backsplash in the kitchen, the same minimalist furniture she'd picked out. None of it was definitive proof, but it was enough to raise the hair on the back of my neck. I wasn't sure what to do with the information yet, so I decided to keep digging quietly. Next, I reached out to one of our mutual friends, Lisa. She and Natalie had been friends for years. If anyone knew what was going on, it'd be her. I kept the conversation casual, just chatting about life, before I gently asked, "Hey, have you heard anything about who Natalie's been leaning on lately? Like this friend who's been helping her through stuff?" Lisa's reaction was immediate. She stiffened and said quickly, "I have no idea what you're talking about." I tried pressing a little further, but she shut it down fast. "Alex, I really can't get involved. I'm sorry." That only made me more suspicious. So I tried another angle. I called Emily, another mutual friend who'd always seemed level-headed. At first, Emily was cautious too, answering my questions with vague, "I'm not sure," and "maybe you should ask Natalie." But I could tell something was bothering her. After a few minutes, she abruptly ended the call, saying she didn't want to get in the middle of it. I sat there, frustrated and staring at my phone. But a few hours later, to my shock, Emily called me back. "Alex," she said in a low voice, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but you deserve to know." I felt my pulse spike. "Tell me what?" "It's Jake," she said. "Natalie's been spending a lot of time with this guy from work named Jake. I don't know all the details, but from what I've heard, he's been giving her advice on the divorce. And I think it might be more than that." For a second, I couldn't speak. The puzzle pieces slammed into place. The cafe, the secrecy, the financial obsession. Jake wasn't just some work friend. He was the one whispering in her ear, telling her how to play her cards. Emily went on. "I don't want to get dragged into this, okay? I didn't tell you anything." I promised her I'd keep her name out of it. Then I hung up, staring into the dark. So it was Jake. Natalie hadn't simply fallen out of love. She'd been preparing to leave me and take as much as she could in the process, and Jake had been helping her set the trap. By Saturday, I was done playing it safe. I drove to Natalie's apartment building and parked about a block away. I figured the only way to confirm this was to see it with my own eyes. After a couple hours of waiting, my gut clenched as I saw Natalie and Jake walking out of her building together. They weren't holding hands or kissing, but the way they stood close, leaning toward each other, speaking in low voices, it was enough. Jake opened his car door for her. She got in, and they drove off together. I didn't follow them. I didn't need to. In that moment, I knew everything I'd suspected was true. Natalie hadn't just decided she wanted space. She'd been plotting an entirely new life, with Jake. And she'd tried to leave me broke and blindsided in the process. But she had no idea what I'd already done to protect myself. And I wasn't finished yet. After seeing Natalie and Jake together with my own eyes, I went home feeling like my world had been flipped inside out. But more than hurt, I felt determined. I wasn't going to let Natalie and Jake walk away with everything I'd worked for. So I called Ryan, my lawyer friend, first thing Monday morning. I told him everything. About Jake, the suspicious bank activity, Natalie's sudden obsession with our finances, and what I'd just witnessed outside her building. Ryan let out a long sigh on the other end of the line. "Alex," he said, "I'm glad you moved those assets when you did. Because if what you're saying is true, this divorce is about way more than splitting up furniture and bank accounts. It's a strategy. She's trying to take you for everything you've got." And that's when we started preparing for the fight. A week later, Natalie and I met for our first mediation session. Walking into that conference room felt like walking into enemy territory. Natalie sat at the other end of the table, wearing a crisp blazer, hair and makeup flawless, her lawyer sitting beside her. Her lawyer opened a thick binder, so thick it looked like he was about to file charges against a Fortune 500 company. He began reading off her demands as if they were completely reasonable. Half the house, half of all savings and investments. My car's spousal support, despite her high salary, I kept my expression neutral. I let him finish his entire list without interrupting. When he finally set down the binder, Ryan calmly slid a slim stack of paperwork across the table. "Before we discuss those terms," Ryan said, "I think it's important for everyone to review these documents." Natalie's lawyer picked them up and started reading. At first, he looked confident, but as he flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed deeper and deeper. His jaw clenched. Finally, he looked up and snapped, "What exactly is this supposed to be?" Ryan leaned forward slightly. "Those documents show the legal transfer of all my client's major assets, including the house, savings, and investment accounts, into an irrevocable trust under his mother's name. The transfers were executed several weeks before your client filed for divorce. They're completely legal and fully documented." The entire room went dead silent. Natalie's lawyer turned toward her, eyes wide. "Did you know about this?" he demanded. Natalie's face drained of color. She snatched the papers from his hands and flipped through them frantically. This can't be real," she stammered, staring at the notarized signatures and dates. Then she slowly lifted her eyes and glared at me. "You planned this," she hissed, her voice trembling. "You knew I was going to file, and you set this up to screw me over." I didn't say a word. I just looked at her, letting her connect the dots all on her own. Her lawyer cleared his throat and said, "We'll need some time to review this information." But the defeat was obvious in his voice. When the mediation session ended, Natalie pulled me aside in the hallway, fury blazing in her eyes. "This isn't over," she said, her voice low and seething. "You're going to regret this. You can't just hide money from me." I looked her right in the eyes and said quietly, "I already regret trusting you. That's the only regret I have." She stared at me, speechless. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I had the upper hand. But things went downhill fast after that. Within days of the mediation, Natalie went into total meltdown mode. First came the phone calls, endless calls. At first, she tried to sound calm and reasonable. "Alex, can we just talk? I know things got out of hand, but maybe we can work this out." When I didn't answer, her voicemails turned emotional. "You're throwing everything away. We can fix this." Then the anger kicked in. "You're a selfish bastard, Alex. You're ruining my life. This is all your fault." Ryan had advised me not to engage, so I ignored every call and every message. But Natalie wasn't done. When I wouldn't talk to her directly, she started telling stories to mutual friends. Suddenly, people I barely spoke to were sending me awkward texts. "Hey man, is it true the divorce is just some kind of prank between you two? Wait, Natalie says you're only pretending to split up to test each other's loyalty." I wanted to bang my head against a wall. Natalie was claiming that the entire divorce was a hoax, a twisted test of how strong our marriage was. But the story didn't hold up for long. Friends started pushing back. If it's a prank, why hire lawyers and file real paperwork? Why demand spousal support if you're not actually splitting up? As people started asking more questions, Natalie's story changed again. Now she was saying it wasn't a prank, but rather a test of my character. "He failed the test," she told anyone who'd listen. "He turned on me and tried to hide all the money. He betrayed me." At first, a few mutual friends seemed sympathetic to her. But things shifted when Matt, a friend of ours who I'd always considered more of an acquaintance than a close buddy, reached out unexpectedly. "Hey man," he messaged me. "I have something you need to see." We met up the next day. Matt pulled out his phone and showed me a string of screenshots. They were texts between Natalie and Jake. At first, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. "How the hell did you get these?" I asked Matt, staring at the screen. Matt explained that he and Jake had a mutual friend who'd been hearing way too much from Jake about securing Natalie's future. The friend grew uncomfortable and decided to quietly forward Matt the screenshots, thinking he'd know what to do with them. Matt looked at me sadly. "This guy's been playing both sides. He's been hyping her up to take you for everything, promising her they'd start a new life together." The messages were brutal. "Natalie, once the settlement's done, we'll have everything we need. I just need him to agree to the terms." "Jake, don't back down. Make him feel guilty if you have to. He owes you. We'll start fresh once you've got the money." My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the screenshots. This wasn't some misunderstanding. It wasn't Natalie finding herself. This was a cold, calculated plan to drain me financially, and Jake was her co-conspirator. Matt gave me a firm pat on the shoulder. "I thought you should know, man. You don't deserve this." I nodded, speechless. The pieces all fell into place. Natalie's weird behavior, the sudden obsession with finances, the divorce demands, the secrecy. It was all part of a plot. And finally, I had the proof. Once Matt gave me those screenshots, there was no going back. I felt like my chest was on fire as I read the texts over and over. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated, calculated down to every dollar they thought they could bleed from me. For days, I couldn't eat or sleep. My brain kept replaying Natalie's words about sacrifices and deserving more, all while she was planning my financial ruin with Jake. But at least now, I knew exactly who I was dealing with. Matt, true to his word, shared the screenshots with a couple of other mutual friends. And just like that, the narrative started to flip. People who'd once been neutral or even sympathetic to Natalie started pulling away from her. Word spread fast. There was no stopping it once those texts were out there. Even her closest friends started ghosting her. One by one, people who'd believed her sob stories realized she'd been lying to everyone's face. When Natalie found out the texts were circulating, she lost it. She called me nonstop, left voicemails switching between begging and raging. "Alex, please, can we talk? We can fix this. I'll drop the whole thing. I made a mistake, okay? You don't have to forgive me, but don't ruin my life." "You're cruel. You've always been selfish. I gave up everything for you." I ignored every single call. Ryan kept reminding me, engaging her now will only give her ammunition. Natalie even tried one last spin with her family. She told her brother that I'd stolen her future and that she was now financially devastated. At first, her brother lashed out at me over text. "Why couldn't you just talk things through like adults instead of hiding everything?" But a few weeks later, after the dust started settling, he messaged me again. "I'm sorry, Alex. I didn't know what she was doing to you. I should have asked questions before taking her side." I didn't hold it against him. We'd all been fooled by Natalie at some point. Meanwhile, Jake disappeared. No trace on social media. No more likes on Natalie's posts. From what I gathered through mutual friends, the second it became clear that Natalie wasn't walking away with a pile of cash, Jake ghosted her completely. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd been using her as much as she'd been using me. The divorce eventually finalized. Natalie ended up with nothing more than her personal belongings. No half of the house, no spousal support, no cut of my investments. All those demands she and Jake had plotted fell apart under the weight of the trust I'd set up with my mom. The court saw right through it. Ryan presented the paperwork, and Natalie's lawyer quietly dropped most of her claims. It was over. The day I got the final decree in the mail, I sat in my living room and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Diane, my mom, came over the next day with a couple buckets of paint and a hardware store shopping bag. "Time to reclaim this house as yours," she said with a smile. We spent the entire weekend painting, rearranging furniture, and throwing out stuff that reminded me of Natalie. It wasn't just physical clutter. It felt like I was finally clearing out the emotional garbage, too. A few weeks later, I stood in the living room, fresh paint on the walls, sunlight streaming through the windows. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like mine. No more wondering who Natalie was texting. No more paranoia about secret bank withdrawals. No more feeling like I was walking through a minefield in my own marriage. Just peace. Sometimes, late at night, my brain tries to wander back to the what-ifs. What if I'd confronted Natalie sooner? What if I'd ignored the red flags? What if I'd trusted her blindly? Then I remember the look on her face at the mediation table when she realized all her plans had crumbled. And I remind myself, I did the right thing. I protected myself. I didn't let her and Jake destroy my life. People sometimes ask me if I'd ever consider getting back together with Natalie, now that she's tried to reach out and apologize. The answer is simple: absolutely not. Not because I'm still angry, but because the woman who stood in front of me the night she asked for a divorce wasn't the woman I married. That Natalie is gone, and I've finally accepted that. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that betrayal doesn't always come screaming through the door. Sometimes it tiptoes in, smiling, wearing the face of the person you love most. I'm grateful to have escaped before it was too late. And now, I get to write the rest of my story the way I want. Free.